Merry holidays, everybody! It's that time of year when we all snuggle round the fire, attempt to hide from Mariah Carey and or Slade, and eat our body weight in mince pies. It is also, traditionally, the time of year when everyone shares their favourite games of the year, and I am no exception to this. 2023 has been a hell of a year, hasn't it? It has been an aggressive onslaught of games that would easily be considered Game of the Year in any other year, but this year, they've all had to fight it out for their crown because there's too many of them. Now, many of the games you're seeing on screen are games that I've not played, and I'm just using trailer footage of games that I pulled from the Game Awards nomination lists as an illustration of just how much has been on offer. But we're not here to talk about games I haven't played, we're here to talk about games that I did. And because it's been an excellent year full of outstanding titles, I decided to expand my list once again, providing you with a top 20 list. The first half of this list contains quite a few smaller gems, the games that I thought had something interesting to them and would highly recommend checking out once you're past the noise of the bigger releases. The second half contains all the big stuff you'd probably expect, the games that hooked me and solidified the fact that this has been one of the greatest years for playing games. Of course, it hasn't been the best year for making games. And I feel it would be wrong to not mention those who have sadly lost their jobs due to management short-sightedness. In a year with so much to celebrate, it saddens me that there's been just as much to condemn. While I am here to champion the games that I love, I do also want to extend my condolences to every single person caught up in the thousands who lost their jobs. I really hope that 2024 works out so much better for you all, as you are the ones responsible for making great games such as these happen in the first place. And speaking of great games, I have 20 of them to get through. So let's start with the end. Goodbye Volcano High is a real mixed bag of a game. On one hand, it has a lot of meandering, unfocused moments, it takes choice away from the player a little too obviously at times, and some of its visuals are a bit lacking. And yet, despite this, it offered me one of the strongest emotional reactions to any game this year. If you're unaware of the game, it is a narrative adventure game. You know, one of those linear story dealies where you mostly just make choices for a young protagonist. You play as Fang, who is entering their senior year at high school, dealing with dramas around their band and future. Oh, and also they're a dinosaur at the tail end of the Cretaceous era. So if that doesn't give you a clue about how the game ends, the repeated news reports during the story about astronomers spotting something in space might clue you in a little more. While I led with the game's issues, it is in this video because it did a lot right. The core cast of characters are generally well written, with the friendship between Fang and their friend Trish being a particular highlight. The core struggles of being a teen are relatable to anyone who's ever been 17 and anxious about their future. I also hugely enjoyed the rhythm game sections of the game, which see you playing songs with Fang's band. They're not the most taxing rhythm action sequences out there, but they're fun and I genuinely wanted them to become available to play anytime after the credits rolled. Sadly they are not, but there we are. And then there was the ending. Again, you can probably guess what fate awaits the cast from the setting, and the fact that it's right there in the game's logo. But how the game approaches this finality through the different reactions of the game's cast. It revels in the power of friendship and celebrates making the most of the time that you have available to you, no matter how short it is. It's a triumphant, defiant ending soundtracked by an excellent song that left me sobbing. Goodbye Volcano High might not have been quite as consistent as I would have liked, but the way its ending dragged me kicking and screaming through every emotion under the sun is enough to give it a nod here at the year's end. Do you know what's always neat about video games? When you get to be accompanied by a little friend. In Planet of Lana, you play as the titular young girl whose planet gets invaded by a mysterious alien force. In an effort to save her sister, Lana teams up with a little creature named Mui, and the two of them help each other liberate the planet from the machines. Planet of Lana harkens back to old puzzle platformers like Oddworld, or more recent efforts like Inside, where the goal is to stealthily avoid threats and figure out the routes through hostile territory. It's not doing much that's particularly new or innovative, and it's a super short experience, but it's an experience that's worth having, all the same. Planet of Lana is an adorable little game, as Mui follows you around, taking commands to help nibble on cables or sneak his way through small passages. He also exhibits special powers, able to activate old structures or hypnotize certain creatures to do his bidding. He becomes a loyal companion that you can pet and show affection for, which makes it all the more affecting when the two of you are forced apart. I loved this little cat ball, and I would defend him to the ends of the earth. And in fact, that's basically what the game is about. It's also just a gorgeous little game with a lot of heart. The visual style is striking, especially when the camera zooms out to show the devastation wrought on this planet on a wider scale. There's no dialogue, meaning the whole story is told through vague commands and chirps, while characters communicate through gestures in a fictional language. And yet, it remains a deeply emotional journey, one about unbreakable bonds, and fighting against a powerful foe with just your wits. Because I'm a sucker for being accompanied by a little friend, Planet of Lana isn't the only sci-fantasy adventure about being helped out by a little friend on my list. Here's Jusant, a game about climbing from Life is Strange developers Don't Nod. But this is absolutely nothing like Life is Strange. For a start, there's no dialogue at all, a far cry from their dialogue-heavy narrative adventures. You play as a boy who has ventured to a tower in a vast desert, where he climbs to reach the top. He is also accompanied by a little friend known as a ballast, a creature that may help to revitalize the tower in some way. Most of what you'll be doing in Jusant is climbing. Climbing walls, climbing vines that have been awoken by your buddy, climbing your own ropes. It's all about climbing. And despite its appearance being similar to climbing sections from many AAA games from over the past decade or so, this system is a lot more involved than you'd expect. You control each of the boy's hands, and you have to alternate your grip on the controller to control his movement. It's a surprisingly tactile and challenging way to move around. You also need to be aware of the position of your rope to ensure that you don't run out as you climb. You need to place rope anchors as you go, allowing you to reach new sections or be able to swing. It was a really interesting mechanic that I loved playing around with, and it'd be nice if other games with climbing in them could take some inspiration from this. There's also a story here told through notes and message terminals as the previous residents of the tower talk of its decline, planning their exodus, that sort of thing. There was also a failed expedition to the top of the tower by other explorers, making you question your fate at the top. Although, not to spoil things, the ending was a bittersweet but satisfying conclusion that may have brought a tear to my eye. Jusant is also just a really pretty game. It features a minimalist art style with bold colours that just really stands out. Also, just look at how adorable this little friend is. You can pet him whenever and he meditates to act as your radar. What else do you need? I don't remember where I first heard about Killer Frequency, but I knew I had to play it from the premise alone. You are a radio DJ who's been booted from their big Chicago mainstream show and shipped off to the boonies where you man the phones on a late night show in a sleepy town. Oh, and it's a dangerous night as the local 911 operator calls to say the local sheriff has been murdered by a serial killer and she needs to head to the next town to get help. Your job is now to prevent your callers from being brutally murdered. This is an extremely interesting take on the horror genre, as you are never directly threatened. Instead, it's your job to help people whose faces you never see avoid being killed by a murderer who is equally invisible. Every decision you make could mean life or death, and the game milks it to make you feel bad when you fail. Killer Frequency is dripping in atmosphere, where despite never being truly under any threat, you'll still feel like it anytime you have to leave the comfort of your booth to head to the front door or even the basement. There's a solid 80s slasher flick vibe to the whole experience, as the serial killer stalking the streets exhibits the same tropes as your Jasons and your Freddys, while your office is all fax machines and vinyl records bathed in the glow of multiple lava lamps. The character writing is excellent too. The moments where you're guiding potential victims out of harm's way are played for all the tension required of them. Every caller is charismatic and larger than life, so if you screw up you will feel terrible. And yet it's all peppered with comedy too, as you get prank callers, a persistent pizza place trying to get free advertising, and snarky remarks from your producer. Killer Frequency is a short but sweet horror-themed experience that I deliberately picked as my Halloween game this year, and it was 100% worth it. I love me a good weirdo puzzle game, and few of them fit that description as well as humanity. The best way to describe it is a Shiba Inu is tasked by the gods to do queue management, and things just kind of spiral out of control from there. Except they don't really, because Humanity is a superbly crafted puzzle game that builds on its central premise in unexpected ways, gradually building a gigantic head out of people that I guess is a meditation on the nature of consciousness and human history or something. So here's how it works. You're a little dog, and through your barks, you lay down instructions for a never-ending stream of faceless humans who pour out of an ethereal door. Your job is to guide them to a guiding light that causes them to ascend somewhere. Your barks cause the crowd to turn, jump, and occasionally arm themselves. And just when you think you have a grasp on what Humanity is about, it just loves to throw weird new elements at you. You can reduce Humanity's gravity to make them glide across large gaps, possess the sea of humans so you can use them as a transporter for yourself, or just throw a large pile of humans at an evil group to overwhelm them. This is exactly the kind of bizarre concept that would have thrived on the original PlayStation if it had been capable of rendering a persistent flow of people that moves like liquid. I love seeing weird, interesting ideas like this one, especially when they're as perfectly executed as Humanity. From one extremely odd puzzle game to another, here is Cocoon, a game that made me wonder how the hell it got made at all. The concept is both simple yet somehow simultaneously complex. You are a little bug man wandering around a desert until you emerge from it and find the world you just inhabited is contained in an orb. As the game goes on, you accumulate a series of orb worlds which are frequently stacked on top of each other to solve problems, and you move in and out of them, your path a constant back and forth between realities. Cocoon is an utterly bizarre game in the best possible way. It was created by the lead designer of Limbo and Inside, and it certainly shows in its refusal to explain itself in any way, leaving the player to interpret what's really going on here. There is some real genius design on show here, with puzzles appearing mind-bending, yet somehow steering you in the right direction at all times. Even the trippy notion of worlds inside worlds inside worlds becomes the most logical thing in the world, as you layer the abilities gained from beating each orb's boss fight to reach increasingly complex, yet well-taught solutions. There were moments as the game progressed that blew my mind in where the concept got taken, and yet it all felt earned after the build-up that comes before it. Cocoon is a little vague at times, but it gives the game a sense of persistent intrigue that drives you forward, desperate for answers that never truly arrive. But the journey remains a memorable one, with its disturbing biomechanical world searing itself onto your brain. It's a good year for surreal puzzle games because here is yet another one. Chants of Sennaar is a little more straightforward to understand than the previous two games, as it's clearly based on the myth of the Tower of Babel. You are an unnamed person who wakes up inside a strange tower full of people who speak a language you don't understand. Along the way, you gradually use signs, pictographs, and other context clues to piece together the languages of each group of people who occupy this tower, from the religious devotees to the proud warriors and beyond. I love figuring out a solution piece by piece in a game, and Chants of Sennaar is full of this. There are few, if any, major signposts to each of the game's puzzle solutions. You just need to use logical deductions and context to unpack what each language's symbols mean. It's surprisingly intuitive to figure all this stuff out, but still offers plenty of challenge as you try and second guess the meanings behind certain depictions of a concept. I also really loved how different each language was and how it represented the culture it was part of. The bards have a flowy, almost poetic syntax where words like theatre and beauty are most frequently represented, while the warrior language is sharp-edged and harsh, and puts more focus on words about duty and weaponry. It's a detective game where the case is learning a language. It's challenging in all the best ways, yet never feels brutally unfair. It respects that you may not know the answer, allowing you to fill in vague possibilities to try and make sense of what limited clues you have available to you. Like Humanity and Cocoon, it was a game that made me feel smart, while satisfying my desire for unravelling secrets in the process, all leading up to an incredibly satisfying conclusion that sees you putting these fictional languages to the test. I didn't think I'd be putting a farming game on here, and yet, here we are. Coral Island is part of an avalanche of cozy games where your job is to manage a farm, pet some animals, and maybe get married to the local baker. There are many games like it, but what Coral Island does is take the staple elements of the genre and reduce the friction to such a degree that it becomes a painfully addictive experience. The premise is straightforward. You've left your big city job and moved to a small island in the tropics to settle down on a homestead and make a living growing vegetables and raising cows. However, this island is also a former tourist spot that's fallen into disrepair and is threatened, as always, by a sinister corporate entity who wants to buy the island, wipe out everything that's good and pure about it before draining it of all its resources. And it's up to you to farm so hard that their corporate office gets devoured by trees. Coral Island does two things extremely well. One, it built a town that for once feels like an actual town, and two, makes every single one of its mechanics enjoyable to play. Let's talk about that town. Normally, these games feature two shacks and a communal river, but Coral Island's town is a sprawling village where neighbours have to walk between their home and workplace like anyone in real life would have to. It's a believable space to navigate, and it helps with making this place feel like somewhere you'd like to live. The character writing helps too, as each character is intensely likeable, even if there are moments of questionable localization. And the mechanics? Let's talk about how the inventory is persistently accessible so you don't need to fuss around in menus all the time. It's easy to find any NPC at any time. All donation items for the museum or temple clearly indicate their status. Every bit of friction this genre can offer has been filed off, leaving a cozy time that's so good to play I found myself losing hours to it without ever really noticing. And this is before we get into the compelling weirdness of nature spirits and merfolk adding their supernatural efforts to the revival of the island, which adds a fun plot element to keep the game's narrative momentum moving forward. If you like Stardew Valley or old school Harvest Moon and want something that feels just as good, Coral Island offers that. Despite what the angry responses to my Sonic is Bad video think, I am actually a fan of the Sonic franchise. I even went to the Sonic Symphony Tour in September, attending the opening night in London, where I had an amazing time. But it is a series with a questionable history that doesn't always hit the mark. Sonic Superstars is very much in the good Sonic camp though. I mean, you could probably have figured that out from the fact that it's in this video at all. But allow me to explain why. It is, to put it simply, a brilliant throwback to the Mega Drive era of games. The design decisions here are largely unchanged from what worked in the 90s, and shows how good the Sonic games can be when they iterate on established good ideas, rather than trying to introduce things like werehogs or original characters do not steal. It also avoids falling into the trap that Sonic Mania often did, by not falling back into pure nostalgia whenever it felt necessary. Don't get me wrong, I loved Sonic Mania, but there was an adherence to the past that so much of the game felt like a greatest hits collection and it got a little tired. Sonic Superstars is all original stages, all of the time, throwing out any notion that we're here to visit Green Hill Zone for the 40 millionth time. Sonic Superstars feels really good to play and has some of the best stage design the series has had for a while. It's got a solid sense of speed, and even the bonus stages are a lot of fun. The reworked Spinning Void special stages often feel like a tricky puzzle to solve, while the swinging game is a great reflex test. The ability to switch between multiple characters is nice too. Each of the main cast feels unique in their own ways, with Tails and Knuckles getting familiar variations to their moves, while Amy provides a hammer and a double jump that change the stages in meaningful ways whenever you can make good use of them. Sure, it's not all great, as many of the boss fights are, quite frankly, the worst, but the overall experience is a brilliant time that reminds us that when Sonic is done well, it is always incredibly fun. When I put these videos together, I always stand firm on one rule. Do not, under any circumstances, include remasters of games that released in previous years. I mostly do this because I get so annoyed when I see end-of-year lists proclaim things like the Mass Effect Legendary Edition or Metroid Prime remasters as the best games of their respective years because, well, they were already the best games of the years they originally came out in, and there are plenty of games from this year that you could have chosen instead. So with that specified, I have to admit that the next entry does technically violate this rule. It is a remaster of a game from a previous console generation. However, it is also the first time this game has seen an official release in the UK, so as far as I'm concerned, it's eligible. It's Fatal Frame 4. Probably not as high as you might have expected because of how hyped I was originally for this, but it's perhaps a testament to how good this year has been for games that I simply couldn't bring myself to put a remaster of a 2008 Wii game any higher than this. Plus the controls are a little wonky, so that is a contributing factor. And yet, this is extremely good stuff. Obviously, I already made an entire video about this one, but here's a general summary. Fatal Frame 4 is excellent because it takes what makes the series good, lots of tension, gruesome ghost designs, and a spooky story about a failed ritual, and turns it into something more personal and meaningful to its cast. We're no longer digging up notes on a long-forgotten past written by some folklorist. We're now delving into secrets lost to the protagonist's childhood. There's also a strong theme around mental health here, which is incredibly sympathetic to sufferers. Rogetsu Hall is far from the usual stereotype of the spooky crazy house, and the horror comes less from the illness itself, and more from the failures to treat it properly. Plus, the imagery of people just losing their faces is so good. Fatal Frame 4 is a superb entry into my favourite horror series, and I'm so glad that this year finally brought it outside Japan, where it can get the recognition that it deserves. The original Oxenfree was a superb game. Take your standard teens wandering into horror story, replace dangerous killers with ghosts in radio waves, and slap a bunch of time loops and personal connections in to make a compelling narrative adventure game that rightfully got a ton of accolades back in 2016. This year, it got itself a sequel, and the time difference really shows, and presents the horrors through a new lens. It's less teens freaking out because their recklessness got them in trouble, and more world-weary adults crashing into supernatural weirdness that's well above their pay grade. As a result, instead of the first game's story of teenage connections and learning to find yourself as you head out into the world, the sequel features a story of adults who've lost their way and are simply trying to get back on track however they can. It's a relatable story for anyone who grew up alongside the two games. It's much the same as the first game mechanically, with the main characters wandering the landscape in a semi-2D fashion, and having deep conversations about the world and their place in it. Players pick their preferred dialogue choices, and those choices affect how the story plays out. For instance, you can choose to be sympathetic to Jacob, your partner in crime, or be ruthlessly mean to him, and no doubt this will affect how the two of you bond as the game progresses. I can only vouch for my personal niceness, but I'm sure he's less inclined to want to remain friends with you if you keep kicking him when he's down. And even better, this time around making those choices doesn't interrupt dialogue like the first game did, which is such a nice improvement that really helped immerse things a little bit better. Oxenfree 2 is a somber yet still tense experience that retreads a lot of ground from its predecessor, but reframes it through an older set of eyes. The main duo is generally likeable, there are some fun interactions with a local park ranger and a high school DJ on the radio, and the atmosphere is perfect throughout. If you liked the original Oxenfree, you will love this too. A narrative that questions the choices we make in life, while also dripping in spooky analog horror effects. My kind of jam. One of my favourite genres of indie games is when a developer who's a huge fan of a major company's franchise gets so bored of waiting for a new entry, they simply make their own. Here is Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, or Jet Set Radio 3, made unofficially by a bunch of Dutch fans who got tired of waiting for Sega to remember that they own the franchise. And you know what? They absolutely nailed it. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk knows exactly what the appeal of Jet Set Radio is. Cool tricks, graffiti, badass soundtrack, bold visuals, it's all here. And in some cases, is even better. You see, as much as I love Jet Set Radio, I found the actual mechanics of skating around a little bit clunky, a little bit dated, especially when you're being chased by cops. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, by contrast, feels a lot more fluid. It's more reminiscent of the Tony Hawk games at times. It's not quite the same due to the differences in how its combo system works, but it is up there, in my opinion. The level design absolutely adds to it too, with plenty of secrets hidden in high-up areas that require you to study the environment around you to find little sequences of rails and billboards that you can wall ride to get up there. It was always so satisfying to skate around this world, just having the time of my life. Of course, visually, it's just Jet Set Radio. It's got that low poly, cel shaded aesthetic exactly right, with massive chunky characters decked out in the gaudiest outfits possible. And if we're talking vibes, the soundtrack is as brilliant as you'd expect it to be, providing a mixture of styles from old school to modern day, with the cherry on top being 3 tracks from actual Jet Set Radio composer Hideki Naganuma. There's also a completely bonkers plot that on one hand is about taking over the city by being really good at rollerblading and graffiti, while the newest member of the crew seeks out his missing head. There's a whole load of psychological weirdness about identity thrown in for good measure too. It's very stupid, but in a way where it knows it's stupid and it just leans into it, and it's brilliant. I do feel that Bomb Rush Cyberpunk was wildly overlooked due to its sudden release with minimal promotion. The Jet Set Radio crowd ate it up, and I include myself in this, but I just didn't see it talked about on a wider level. So here you go. Here's me talking about it. If you want something funky fresh that captures that late 90s Shibuya-kei aesthetic, you need to play this game. Right now. God damn it, the gacha game racket got me. I can't believe this has happened. Look, I make no illusions about why MiHoYo are so successful. They make free-to-play games which lightly encourage you towards spending money, usually on random rolls, to get an ever-increasing cast of anime cohorts, and encouraging more of this sort of thing to propagate the various app stores of the world. I never got into Genshin Impact, but oh boy did I get into this one. Here's the thing though, Honkai Star Rail is much more than simply a slot machine for anime girls. It's also a really good RPG in its own right. There is a superb world to explore, currently consisting of a space station plagued by an alien menace, a snow planet threatened by cosmic forces, and a fleet of Chinese-themed spacecraft full of long-life species. In addition, there are some brilliant combat mechanics clearly inspired by the Persona franchise in both the way they exploit weaknesses and in the presentation, which clearly emerge from going, damn, Persona 5 looks great. It's not quite on Persona 5's level, of course, but the obvious inspiration goes a long way towards making this look good. Where Honkai Star Rail truly shines is in its writing. Even if you do not pay a penny on this game, you will still get a bunch of quests starring fun characters, deep cosmic mysteries, and some of the funniest writing I've seen in the genre. The protagonist is supposedly a mysterious figure harboring unusual powers, and yet they constantly steer into full Chaos Goblin territory. They develop an obsession for the bins on Jarilo 6. They dress like they gave up halfway through. And at almost every opportunity, the game allows you to make them give the dumbest responses known to man, and you better believe I selected them every single time. I did lose track of some of this game's updates as the year has been, quite frankly, ludicrous, but I have been steadily returning to this strangely compelling RPG that has no business being as good as it is. You got me good, miHoYo. And yet somehow, I'm not even mad about it. Here's another entry that stretched my definition of released this year, but considering this is a similar situation to Fatal Frame, I will allow it. The original game didn't get a Western release, and to be fair, this is a full remake rather than a remaster, so I guess it counts either way. Anyway, it's Yakuza Ishin, or more accurately, Like a Dragon Ishin, as Sega have now leaned firmly into calling the series a direct translation of the original Japanese name. It's your typical Yakuza game, albeit one set during the samurai era. You play as Kazuma Kiryu playing Ryoma Sakamoto under the alias of Saito Hajime. He's a disgraced ronin seeking the murderer of his adopted father, so he heads to Kyo to join the Shinsengumi and find him. However, he must fight to avoid distractions such as karaoke and an entire farming game along the way. As always, this is a superb Yakuza game, to the point where it's hard to really describe it in any meaningful way. It's got the tense crime drama, but now with an added historical setting. It's got extremely fun combat, and you'll be endlessly distracted by side quests with goofy storylines. The combat is fun with the addition of swords and guns, with the wild dancer and swordsman stances turning the game into an awesome little hack and slash, as well as the brawling the series is known for. The side quests continue to be the best in the business, featuring a dancing minigame, helping a man translate letters from his girlfriend with an impenetrable dialect which the localization hilariously turned into Cockney, and a whole saga involving a bunch of rival couriers. Did I mention there's an entire farming game here, by the way? It's the Yakuza 0 Cabaret Club all over again, as I meet orders on my little plot of land, bonding with ancient Haruka, and cooking with little WarioWare style minigames. It's so out of place, and yet so wonderfully in place at the same time. Like a Dragon Ishin is a fun little feudal Japan take on the series, and while it's not exactly doing anything new, it continues to show why this series is so beloved. And now I've got Gaiden to play as well, once I've gotten around to finishing 6 and 7 as well. Oh god, there's too many of these things, I swear. And yet, I'm going to end up playing every single one of them. I was never really a fan of The Messenger. I tried it out on Game Pass, but I just didn't click with it. So it is a surprise to me that Sea of Stars, an RPG set in the same universe that acts as a loose prequel, ended up being one of my favourite games of the year. Sea of Stars is a classic top-down JRPG, albeit one made in Canada, in the vein of Chrono Trigger. It's set in a world plagued by fantasy horrors, and the only hope is training up children born on the solstices who carry inherent magical ability. You play as Valere and Zale, two of these solstice warriors, as they set out on a quest to defeat the Fleshmancer and his abominations known as Dwellers. It's somewhat standard JRPG fare with turn-based combat and a pixel art world where you solve puzzles to progress. However, there's a lot of modern sensibility despite the team's fangirling for Square Enix SNES RPGs. For a start, movement on the overworld is some of the smoothest I've ever encountered in the genre, with a generous run speed combined with light parkour elements. You'll be climbing on cliffs and grappling across gaps in ways clearly informed by the team's work on The Messenger. The combat also strives to do something interesting, with character switching being flexible, and your larger party can be tagged in at any time. There are timed hits, similar to a very different Square RPG of the time, Super Mario RPG. There's also a great deal of strategy in tackling enemy weaknesses to prevent them from unleashing more powerful moves, which is a really fun touch. Plus, Moonerang is one of the most satisfying abilities I've ever encountered in a game. The story is fairly rudimentary and doesn't inspire much excitement, but the character writing is superb. We all need a friend like Garl. He could have easily been the bumbling comic relief sidekick, but instead they made him a valuable, essential member of the team, representing its heart. Then you've got Sarai, who is a brilliant character, initially revealed through a secret identity that's so obvious even the characters acknowledge they saw through her disguise, which was genuinely hilarious. There were a lot of charming moments like this, and it was hard not to love this little ragtag band. Plus, just look at this pixel art. It's gorgeous. Sea of Stars was a genuine surprise, but one that I'm glad I dipped into, thanks to its presence on PlayStation Plus. It's a labour of love full of charm and fun design details that made the whole experience a joy from start to finish. As someone who likes a good mystery, it was honestly kind of a crime that it took me until this year to play the Danganronpa series. But as soon as I did, I basically blitzed through the 3 main games in the series, and just in time for the release of Master Detective Archives' Raincode, which comes from most of the same team. Raincode's premise is an odd one. There's a place called Kanai Ward where it rains all the time, and a corporation known as Amaterasu rules the population with an iron fist. However, there are deep mysteries at its core, and the World Detective Organization needs to figure out what's going on. Problem is, only a handful of agents have made it into the city, one of whom is Yuma Cocohead, a trainee that doesn't remember who he is. Also, he's accompanied by a cocky and flirtatious ghost named Shinigami, who can pull him into a supernatural mystery labyrinth to help him with deductions, where she also becomes an anime girl. Look, just go with it, it's fine. Raincode starts you off by solving relatively straightforward murder mysteries. A closed location murder like the creator's big series, a serial killer of legend, and teen girl jealousy gone extremely deadly. But then, as the game progresses, its story gets even more weird. A strange masked man appears claiming to be Amaterasu's CEO, you get framed for terrorism, and it all builds up to a conspiracy full of twists that are impossible to see coming, with some unexpected survival horror vibes thrown in for good measure. There's also a fun cast of characters here, with Yuma being accompanied on each case with another member of the WDO. Each one has a special supernatural ability that comes in handy in each case, and the use of these powers is incredibly inventive. But of course, the big draw is Yuma's special ability, the Mystery Labyrinth. Usually called on during moments of high tension, Shinigami will pull Yuma into a Persona-like alternate universe where phantom versions of obstructive characters will fight Yuma, all while you wander through a surreal world that throws clues and questions at you in increasingly violent ways. It's a mind palace gone feral. And of course, the quality of the mysteries themselves is high. There are twists and turns in these cases that feel incredibly satisfying to uncover, from unusual murder methods in the serial killer case, to a case where the reveal is that all your suspects are guilty. Raincode is a bizarre experience, one full of intricate puzzles to solve and conspiracies to uncover. I didn't expect to place it as high as I did, but I can't deny just how much fun I had with this weird little mystery game. One prevailing thought I saw from a certain brand of online idiot was the notion that Super Mario Bros. Wonder absolutely should not have been nominated for Game of the Year at Jeff Keighley's Funtime Ad Showcase with occasional awards. Do you know what I say to that? Like, dude, you haven't played Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and it shows. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is pure joy condensed down into a Switch cartridge, ready to turn your Switch into a perpetual happy machine. This is 2D Mario at its best. Well, almost. It's not quite Super Mario World, but it's close. I'm not going to talk about how good the game feels to play. It's a 2D Mario game. If you expected anything else, you're a fool. It does. It feels great. It's snappy, it's responsive, it's exactly what you want from a 2D Mario game. What makes Super Mario Bros. Wonder so brilliant is the Wonder Flowers, a concept that shows Nintendo have wholly embraced the theory that the series was created on drugs by just going absolutely absurd with it. Top-down segments, transformations, weird visual changes, quiz shows, and, well, this. You also get to play as multiple Mario characters, giving the game a party vibe as Luigi, the princesses, assorted Toads and Yoshis, and popular character Nabbit are all here to join in the fun. I spent most of my time playing as Luigi and Daisy, in case you're wondering where my Mario allegiances lie. And that's before we get to the new power-ups. Sure, there's the Drill and the Fire Flower, which are Mario classics, but now you can turn most of these characters into an elephant who stomps around and sprays water from their trunk. It's such a silly new addition, but it's always fun to see Mario inflate and yell "Wowie Zowie" before stomping around and shoving yourself into pipes. They've added in an absurd amount of character to the elephant transformations, and it's adorable. There's a huge amount of character in general. The animations in this game are superb and just add to the fun time vibe that this game is going for. It's Mario, and even better, it's weird Mario. Have no doubt, this absolutely deserved its Game of the Year nomination. It isn't Game of the Year itself though, as there are 3 very distinct candidates in my mind for what should take that accolade. So we should probably get on with those then. If I had a nickel for every time the developer of a horror series I strongly disliked turned around and made a cartoony action game with Rush in the title featuring a protagonist wearing a scarf and drawing their powers from a cat that would go on to be one of my all-time favourite games, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it is weird that it happened twice. Hi-Fi Rush crash landed into the public consciousness in January this year in the middle of an Xbox showcase. Tango Gameworks, famed for the horror game The Evil Within, have been working on a game that is very much not that, and you can play it right now. But here's the thing, I hated The Evil Within. I found it frustrating to play, and it featured an absolute mess of a narrative. And then there's Ghostwire Tokyo, a game that disappointed me so hard that I've somehow convinced myself I gave up on it. When I actually did finish it, I just forgot that I did because it was so bland. So naturally, I wasn't entirely enthusiastic about Hi-Fi Rush. But it's not a horror game, which is interesting. And everything I see about this game feels hyper-targeted towards me. There's a goofy protagonist, there's a robot cat, you fight to the beat of the music, you're taking on the man, using the power of rock and roll. It's got a Saturday morning cartoon vibe with exactly the kind of visuals that catch my attention. What to do? Well, it's on Game Pass, so I guess I'll just install it and hope it doesn't disappoint in the way that Tango's other games have. And as you can probably guess from the fact that it's my 3rd favourite game of the year, it did not disappoint. In fact, I'm going to let you in on a secret. This top 3 was super close. Like, aggressively close. I could happily call any of this top 3 my game of the year and it would be true in some fashion. For instance, Hi-Fi Rush has not 1, but 2 of my favourite gaming moments this year. There's a very silly scene involving doorways that made me just lose it, and then you get to have a big old fight in a cafeteria set to the goddamn Prodigy. Plus, it's just super fun to play. Maybe it's the curse of my natural rhythmic instinct, but the number of times where a game has made me wish I could just do stuff in time with the music is too many. And in Hi-Fi Rush, that's the whole concept. You have to fight on the beat, and when you do, oh god, it's so satisfying. You're kicking ass and jamming out, and it leaves you with a sense of persistent euphoria. God damn it, we need more games like Hi-Fi Rush. And I also need that 808 Nendoroid the second it goes on sale. Oh no. It is the game that everybody's been talking about this year, and I'm likely one of roughly 5 million end-of-year lists placing this super high, but I don't care, because it's that good. It is Baldur's Gate 3, and I picked it up because of my combination of my love of D&D, and the memes about God's favourite princess and so on. And I have absolutely not regretted my decision, as Baldur's Gate 3 is so full of great writing, brilliantly inventive gameplay, and of course, the ability to have sex with a bear. Baldur's Gate 3 is the kind of game where you can talk your way out of most situations instead of fighting your way through them. You can defeat a hag by shoving her off a cliff, well, until they patch that out, thanks Larian. You can cause a toll collector to explode themselves instead of fighting them. You can endlessly cast grease on any group of enemies to create a flammable AoE spot. The possibilities are endless. In other words, it's a really cool interpretation of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set in video game form. There are a ton of concessions and adjustments that have taken the different mediums into account, but they've been seen as so enjoyable that some DMs have taken those changes back to their own games and made new house rules around them. It's a fun system to play around with, especially when playing on the original's weird quirks. But the real star here is, of course, the character writing. Your party is a delightful mix of weirdos, all with bizarre backstories. You have Dark Cleric Shadowheart, who has elicited a mass of I can fix her reactions from the player base, and that includes myself, yes. There's Gale, your standard wizard with a nuke inside him that requires a diet of whatever magic flavoured junk you have in your pocket, and who is absolutely thirsty for the player character. I swear to God, Gale, please, I just want to be friends. And of course there's Best Girl Karlach, the big tank with a heart of gold that just wants a hug, and you better believe I gave her that hug as soon as I was able to. But it goes beyond just the party. The character writing is consistently great elsewhere. The world of Baldur's Gate 3 is alive and bustling with quirky characters that I wonder just how they managed to hold it all together so well. Even in later parts of the game, the character writing remains some of the best in the business. In summary, Baldur's Gate 3 completely understands the Chaos Goblin nature of most D&D parties, and leans into it at every opportunity. There's multiple outcomes for conversations, the ability to use your abilities in weird and unusual ways, and a party of misfits who shouldn't work as a unit but absolutely do. Whatever your D&D playstyle, you can replicate it here, and it's astounding work. Like, I swear, they have taken everything that you could possibly think to do, and there's a way to do it in the game, legitimately. It is wild to think that a dense CRPG has gone on to become one of the biggest games of the year, but it is easy to see why. I see people endlessly crying out for games with meaningful choices, sprawling worlds full of interesting characters, and the ability to lose yourself in a grand adventure. Baldur's Gate 3 has all of these things, so it's no wonder that it's taken the gaming world by storm this year, and much like Hi-Fi Rush, it was almost my game of the year, but there was something else that just snatched that title away. In the past 2 years, my choice of game of the year has arguably been quite surprising. Forza Horizon 5 was a racing game, and Tunic was a small, unassuming title that hooked me more than I ever expected it to. I would love my choice for this year to be another grand surprise, even to myself. Except, this isn't that. It's the opposite of that. If you're aware of my obsessive, almost religious love for Control in 2019, you already know what my game of the year is. It's Alan Wake 2, isn't it? Here's the thing. I am deeply, deeply embedded into the Remedyverse at this point, trapped in the dark place with no chance of escape, I suppose you could say, much like Alan himself. But unlike Alan, I am more than willing to dive deeper. Alan Wake 2 is split into two halves, each of which has its own distinct identity. On one side, you have a dark, moody detective story as FBI Special Agent Saga Anderson and her suspiciously familiar partner Alex Casey arrive in Bright Falls to investigate a series of strange murders. On the other side, you have a surreal dreamscape as Alan Wake remains trapped in the dark place after the end of the first game and is desperately trying to write his way out of it. Saga's side of the story is brilliant, bringing the small town weirdness of the first game and its obvious inspiration Twin Peaks to the forefront. You spend a lot of time talking to people, gathering clues and occasionally fighting off the Taken. Her side of the story is a methodical, slow-paced investigation that provides context to the wider narrative and allows you to see the effects of Alan's actions in the first game on other people. Saga herself is an excellent character, and the turmoil she goes through realising that Alan is rewriting her life around her is a brilliant narrative thread that kept me on my toes the whole time. Alan's side of the story is pure, surreal horror. As Alan, you wander a dark, twisted version of New York, attempting to avoid the gaze of shadowy figures who may or may not be wanting to attack. You never know. While you do this, you are messing with reality around you, typing up scenes that change how the world operates, opening new routes and story beats, and occasionally dealing with a supernatural talk show that pops up every time reality loops back on itself. What's impressive is how these two stories are deeply intertwined and yet play out in completely different ways. Even though on a surface level the game is largely the same, Saga and Alan feel different in every possible way, and I commend Remedy for pulling this off so perfectly. This is some of the most impressive storytelling in gaming. Aside from a dense narrative full of secrets and mysteries, the way this story is told uses every possible medium available to the team. Music, experimental filmmaking, video laid on CG imagery, and of course, the interactivity of video games. Even the way the game weaves different locations together to create a creepy, unsettling vibe is astounding work. Not to mention, in a year where so many of my favourite gaming moments were deeply tied to music, it's perhaps unsurprising that Remedy, the creators of the Ashtray Maze, would provide the greatest musical moment of the entire year. Alan Wake 2 is the culmination of everything Remedy have made up to this point. It's spooky, hilarious, pretentious, heart-wrenching, and gorgeous all at once, and the rollercoaster ride it took me on is more than enough to make me call it my Game of the Year for 2023. And with that, we have reached the end. Thank you to every single team who produced the games on this list for all of your hard work. And on a similar note, once again, I truly hope that everyone who suffered through mass layoffs across the industry gets back on their feet soon. It's a real shame that a year so full of excellent gaming experiences could also be so painful for the people who make them. And thank you, of course, to you at home for watching this. And I hope you enjoyed this trip through my favourite games of the year. Let me know your personal choices down in the comments, and let's celebrate one of the best years for games in recent memory. And I think, to close us out, there's only one way I can think of to recap the full top 20. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll see you again very soon. Thank you, and Happy New Year.